The weird thing about Mazda's SUV lineup right now is that the older choice might actually make more sense than the newer one. The new Mazda CX-5 is back with fresh styling, updated tech, and the same premium feel people already loved, but the Mazda CX-50 was supposed to replace it as the tougher, more modern SUV. So why are so many buyers still leaning toward the CX-5? Is the CX-50 actually better, or did Mazda accidentally create two SUVs fighting for the exact same customer? By the end of this video, one of these Mazdas is going to look like the smarter buy, and it may not be the one you expect. Mazda is in a really unusual position right now because instead of replacing one SUV with another, it's basically selling two different answers to the same question. On one side, you have the new Mazda CX-5, the familiar, city-friendly SUV that built a reputation for feeling more premium than its price tag suggests. It's been one of Mazda's best-selling vehicles in America for years because it mixes sharp styling, sporty handling, and an upscale interior without pushing into luxury brand pricing. Then there's the Mazda CX-50. This was introduced as the more rugged, adventure-focused alternative. It's wider, tougher-looking, and clearly designed to attract buyers who might otherwise shop something like a Subaru Outback or a Toyota RAV4 Woodland. Mazda even gave it a more aggressive stance and outdoor-focused image to separate it from the CX-5. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the CX-50 being newer and supposedly more versatile, a lot of buyers are still gravitating toward the CX-5. And when you park these two SUVs side by side, the differences aren't as obvious as you might expect. Both have premium-looking cabins, both offer turbocharged power, and both sit in nearly the same price range. So the big question is, did Mazda create two SUVs for completely different lifestyles, or are these vehicles competing against each other more than they should? As we break down the design, comfort, technology, performance, and overall value, one of these SUVs starts to stand out in a very surprising way. Once you start walking around these two SUVs, Mazda's strategy becomes a lot clearer and also a little more confusing. The CX-5 still looks sleek and upscale, almost like a scaled-down luxury SUV. The body lines are smooth, the front grille is clean and elegant, and it has that sporty stance that's made Mazda stand out in crowded parking lots for years. It feels designed for someone who spends more time commuting through the city than heading into the mountains. The CX-50 takes a completely different approach. It sits lower and wider, with chunky black cladding around the wheel arches, a tougher-looking front end, and roof rails that instantly scream weekend adventure. Park it next to the CX-5, and the CX-50 definitely looks more aggressive and outdoorsy. But interestingly, some buyers might actually prefer the cleaner, more premium vibe of the CX-5. Inside is where things get really interesting. Both SUVs have interiors that feel shockingly expensive for the price. Mazda continues to do an amazing job with materials, soft-touch surfaces, and minimalistic design. The dashboards look clean instead of overloaded with giant screens and flashy lighting. In the CX-5, the cabin feels cozy and refined, almost like a luxury lounge. The seats are supportive, visibility is excellent, and everything feels familiar in a good way. The CX-50, meanwhile, feels more open and rugged. The wider cabin gives it a more spacious personality, and Mazda added little design touches that make it feel adventure-ready without going overboard. But depending on your priorities, you may notice something unexpected. The CX-5 actually feels slightly more premium and quieter on the road. That's probably not what Mazda intended people to say about the older model. When it comes to performance, both SUVs deliver something many rivals don't. They're genuinely fun to drive. Even the base engines feel responsive enough for daily driving, but the turbocharged versions completely change the personality of these SUVs. Put your foot down, and both the CX-5 and CX-50 deliver strong mid-range power that makes highway merging and passing feel effortless. The steering also deserves attention. Unlike a lot of crossovers that feel numb and disconnected, these Mazdas actually feel sharp and controlled in corners. The CX-5 feels slightly more athletic and refined, while the CX-50 leans toward stability and confidence on rougher roads. Neither is a hardcore off-roader, but the CX-50 definitely gives off a more adventurous character. Fuel economy is another area where the differences are smaller than many buyers expect. Depending on trim and engine choice, both SUVs land in a very similar range, which makes the buying decision even harder. And then there's pricing. Once you start adding higher trims and turbo engines, the CX-50 can climb surprisingly close to entry-level luxury SUV territory. That raises a huge question: if these two Mazdas cost almost the same, drive similarly, and offer nearly identical tech, which one actually delivers the better overall experience? Because once we get into the biggest strengths, biggest compromises, and the trims you should actually buy, one of these SUVs starts making a lot more sense than the other. Here's the moment where this comparison completely changes direction, because on paper, the CX-50 feels like it should be the obvious winner. It's newer, tougher looking, more adventurous, and marketed as the more modern Mazda SUV. But once you actually spend real time driving both back to back, something surprising happens. The CX-5 just feels better to live with. The first thing you notice is refinement. On the highway, the CX-5 feels calmer and quieter, almost like a vehicle from a more expensive brand. Road noise is lower, the suspension feels smoother over broken pavement, and the steering has this natural, connected feel that makes everyday driving genuinely enjoyable. It doesn't try too hard, it just works. The CX-50 still drives well, and in some situations, it absolutely shines. It feels more planted on rough roads, and the wider stance gives it a confident personality. If you're the type of buyer loading bikes onto the roof rack or heading toward camping trails on weekends, the CX-50's rugged image makes sense immediately. But for most people, the CX-5 starts pulling ahead in the areas that matter every single day.